Tywin Lannister had long prided himself on his ability to crush sentiment beneath the heel of duty. In the days that followed Cersei's execution, he reinforced that notion time and again, maintaining an unruffled composure while the Red Keep shook with aftershocks of outrage and fear. Yet in the silent hours before dawn, when all the courtiers slept and not even the patrols disturbed his solar, Tywin found himself thinking of his daughter's final glare. That look was not begging or pleading, no cry for mercy. She had aimed pure hatred at him, as though cursing the name of Lannister with her last breath. Tywin accepted that hatred as the price demanded by a realm that could devour the weak. Power had always been the central tenet of his life's work, and Cersei had endangered that power. In exposing her sins, in standing aside while she was led to the scaffold, he had reasserted the authority of House Lannister. But neither that reassertion nor the king's savage triumph had done a thing to quell the ever-rising wave of complications engulfing Westeros. Robert Baratheon, in whose name the blow had fallen, was hardly satisfied. Grief and fury warred in him, and each day he drank more heavily, his volatile moods lashing out at counselors, servants, even his friends. The small folk had begun to call him the grieving stag behind his back, mocking how one day he might drunkenly rage about traitors and whoremongers, and the next day he might weep over the memory of Lyanna Stark or stare glassy-eyed into his cups. Tywin watched in silent disapproval. A drunken king, still young enough that he ought to have been in his prime, had turned rudderless. That, in turn, offered ample opportunity for others to step forward and shape the realm's future, and Tywin intended to fill that vacuum before any upstart could. Even so, he found himself bothered in a quiet, deep place within. Robert was letting the monarchy rot from within. Tywin would have to hold the realm together, but the rot above him would continue to drip. The first pressing concern was the matter of succession. Robert had never fathered a trueborn child upon Cersei, a fact that now everyone acknowledged. The brood produced by that marriage was wholly disqualified and scattered to the winds. Joffrey at the Wall, Myrcella in a distant convent, Tommen fostered in the Stormlands. Thus, the rightful heir by birth order and law was Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone. But Robert refused to name him, claiming Stannis was too humorless, too rigid, too disliked by half the realm. Renly Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End and Robert's youngest brother, was a more appealing candidate to many lords. He was charming, affable, skilled at forging alliances. But Renly was the youngest brother and had no strict right by law to precede Stannis. Meanwhile, Robert had been entertaining the notion, encouraged by Tywin, of elevating one of his bastards, most likely Edric Storm, and formally legitimizing him. That move would be unprecedented in the sense that it would skip the clear line of inheritance in favor of a bastard boy. Not only would it incense Stannis, it might be considered by some to be a blatant violation of the established rules of succession. Yet, with Tywin's political might behind him, Robert might impose that arrangement. The tension, however, would be explosive. Rumors reached Tywin's ears that Stannis was furious. Locked away at Dragonstone, the older brother had received only a curt raven from Robert informing him of Cersei's crimes and punishment. Stannis had responded with a dozen accusations in turn. That the king had always been blind, that the realm was in moral decay, that the gods might punish them all for the abomination of incest, and that the rightful heir was clearly Stannis, not some pandered bastard. He threatened in his letters that if Robert refused him his birthright, he would gather his banners, raise the fiery heart of House Baratheon of Dragonstone, and claim the crown by right of arms. That threat was not empty, for Stannis was known as a staunch and tireless commander. Tywin had read those letters. He found them tactless but recognized the danger. Stannis was no man to be trifled with if forced into rebellion. The realm could ill afford another war. Robert, in a drunken haze, tossed the letters onto the floor, cursing his brother as a sour wretch. But Tywin quietly ensured that King's Landing would be prepared. He instructed the gold cloaks to train more diligently. He arranged for additional shipments of grain to fortify the city's reserves, anticipating a siege if the worst came to pass. He beckoned Kevan Lannister from the Westerlands to help oversee these measures, offering Kevin a prominent position at court as Master of War, an informal title for now but useful in giving Kevin authority. Kevin arrived within a fortnight, uneasy about his niece's fate but loyal to Tywin's will. At the same time, Renly Baratheon was making his own moves. With Cersei gone, no queen presided over the royal household, nor had Robert yet announced a new marriage. Renly used his seat on the small council to strengthen ties with Mace Tyrell. The Tyrells, as often, were eager for more influence. Mace Tyrell floated the idea of wedlock between Robert and his daughter Margaery, praising her virtue, beauty, and rumored resemblance to Lyanna Stark, a resemblance, of course, that Mace exaggerated to curry favor with Robert's famed nostalgia. Robert, for his part, was in no hurry to wed again. His last marriage had ended in one of the greatest scandals in Westeros's history, but Renly quietly whispered that Margaery might soften Robert's sorrow and help produce a legitimate heir, a child wholly of Baratheon stock, provided that the king still had fatherhood in him, a question that no one dared ask too loudly. With Tywin's pragmatic nature, forging an alliance with the Tyrells could help quell tensions in the Reach, secure more food for the capital, and overshadow Stannis' claims. The question was whether Robert would accept or continue to wallow in bitterness. For weeks, the question lingered. Robert would not give a definitive answer. He insisted the realm had more urgent concerns than another wedding feast, ignoring the reality that a childless king inflamed every noble's ambition to question or claim the throne. Tywin grew impatient, for he saw that the open seat of queen consort invited chaos. Suitors, proposals, scurrilous rumors. Dornish envoys quietly poked around, suggesting that maybe Robert should consider a young scion of House Martell, bridging the old rift left by the Targaryen sack. Even the Vale had ladies who might be prospective queens. Then there was talk that Robert might prefer no wife at all, continuing his whoring ways indefinitely. That would only heighten the possibility of a contested succession. So Tywin continued to press him, day by day, to settle the matter. He hammered home that a stable monarchy needed a queen. He even alluded to the possible advantages of forging ties with the Reach, specifically by wedding Margaery Tyrell. More than once, Robert flung his goblet across the room, cursing Tywin for meddling in his private life. Tywin bore these outbursts without flinching. Meanwhile, Mace Tyrell sweetened the pot by dispatching wagons of provisions to King's Landing, earning the admiration of the small folk for his generosity. Tyrion Lannister had come to the capital in the wake of his sibling's disgrace, uncertain how his father would treat him. He arrived to find the city in an uneasy hush, with talk of the fallen queen still echoing in the squares. If Tyrion's dwarfish stature already turned heads, the knowledge that he was Tywin's only surviving child of legal standing gave him a new layer of mystique. Some folk called him the Lone Lannister, half in jest. Tyrion had no illusions that his father's nature would be any warmer toward him now, but he did sense that Tywin's need for a capable mind might open a door. Immediately, Tyrion offered his services to help manage the crown's finances or to handle delicate diplomatic tasks. Tywin eyed him coolly. He disliked acknowledging that Tyrion was indeed cunning, well-read, and adept at subtlety. Still, with Jaime exiled and Cersei dead, Tywin had few others he could count on at court. Kevin was competent, but more a soldier than a thinker. So Tywin grudgingly appointed Tyrion as a special envoy, the sort who might go where official courtiers could not. He assigned him to gather information about Renly's dealings with the Tyrells and to keep an ear on Littlefinger's endless schemes. Tyrion accepted. It was not quite the seat of hand of the king or master of coin, but it was authority enough to let him exercise his intellect and rummage through the city's secrets. Almost immediately, Tyrion recognized that the city was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. The small folk, anxious over rising bread prices, vented frustration at everything from the scandalous downfall of the queen to the king's overindulgence. There were rumors that Stannis would soon march on King's Landing if Robert dared to legitimize his bastard. Others speculated that the Targaryen exiles across the narrow sea might sense an opportunity to invade, seeing the Baratheon monarchy as weakened from within. Of course, there was always the chance that Dorne, still nursing bitterness from the war, would strike at some moment of vulnerability. Tyrion realized that while Tywin had a talent for imposing an iron order, the swirl of events might yet spin beyond even Tywin's control. If that happened, Westeros could plunge into a war to dwarf anything seen since the rebellion that put Robert on the throne. Varys, the Master of Whisperers, was polite and obsequious to Tywin's face, insisting that he had always suspected the twins' affair but never had enough proof. Tywin took those words with a grain of salt. Varys was the sort of creature who survived by adopting neutrality and pleasing whomever held power in the moment. Tyrion privately guessed that Varys had known more than he ever let on. Indeed, Tyrion surmised that Varys might have orchestrated certain hints that reached Tywin in the first place, though it was impossible to say for certain. For now, Varys bowed to Tywin's authority, wearing that demure smile that suggested he was more interested in the realm's good than any personal advantage. Even so, Tyrion suspected that the spider was spinning new webs in secret, connecting threads that might prove vital in the future. Littlefinger remained a fixture on the small council as master of coin, but Tywin insisted that all major expenditures required his personal approval. Littlefinger masked his irritation with witticisms, praising Tywin's stewardship while quietly expanding his own personal business interests through the city's brothels and lenders. He had no illusions about Tywin's capacity to crush him if he pushed too far. Therefore, he played the game with more caution, sowing small seeds of influence among the lesser lords who drifted in and out of King's Landing. Tyrion, assigned by his father to keep an eye on Littlefinger, found himself both fascinated and wary. Peter Baelish had an uncanny knack for turning trifles into leverage, for forging alliances out of seeming nothings. If he perceived that Tywin's hold on the king was slipping, he might well jump to support Stannis or Renly or any alternative. However, thus far, Tywin's grip was still firm. Robert might curse him behind closed doors, but Tywin was effectively the linchpin of the monarchy, the man who had suppressed a scandal that could have otherwise led to a total meltdown. Across the sea, rumors persisted that Daenerys Targaryen, wed to a Dothraki warlord, might soon bear a child rumored to be the stallion who mounts the world. Merchants told tales of Dothraki Khalasars massing near the edges of the narrow sea. Tywin gleaned this from the merchant caravans arriving in port, from letters sent by Lannister allies in Pentos. He took it seriously enough to order the occasional blacksmith to produce more swords and spears, anticipating that if the Targaryens returned to Westeros in force, the realm must not be caught unready. Yet many at court brushed off the threat, calling it old men's ghost stories. Robert, ironically, seemed to take it to heart. He had always loathed the Targaryens, and the mention of a living Targaryen brood set him fuming. Some nights, staggering drunk, he would vow to cross the sea himself and smash them in the cradle. Tywin had never cared for the Targaryens one way or another, aside from disdaining their incestuous traditions, but even he had to note the possibility that, with the monarchy so unsettled, a foreign invasion might tip the scales. It might not be a real concern for a year or two, but in the Game of Thrones, a year's grace could vanish swiftly. Meanwhile, in the Westerlands, the lesser lords who had once served Cersei's bidding at court found themselves stripped of favor. Tywin made no effort to recall them, punishing them for their complicity in letting the rumor fester or for the faint suspicion that they had supported the twins. He installed men loyal to him alone, ensuring that any potential rebellion from his own region would be quashed before it even sparked. Riverrun was quiet, with Hoster Tully old and in failing health. The Vale was controlled by Lisa Arryn, who kept her young son Robert sheltered and had little inclination to meddle in the capital's turmoil. The North, under Eddard Stark, remained distant. Though Ned Stark had expressed relief at the scandal's resolution, he had no love for politics in the South, especially after seeing how quickly Cersei's downfall had turned ugly. In a larger sense, though, the entire Seven Kingdoms stood at a crossroads, unsure whether the monarchy would stabilize or spiral into conflict. The day's alliances and enmities might shift at the faintest breeze. Tywin recognized this danger intimately. He had, in some respects, gotten what he wanted by excising Cersei's transgressions before they consumed the entire house. But the cost had been steep indeed, and the realm had only begun to absorb the consequences. Jaime Lannister, in the free city of Lys, spent his days in a dull haze of regret and anger. His once golden hair, uncut and unkempt, curled around his face. He took mercenary work under a false name for a while, selling his sword arm to local men of coin. But Lys was a city of pleasure and vice more than war, so after a few squalid skirmishes, Jaime drifted across the sea routes, eventually winding up in Volantis. Everywhere, though, he felt the stares of those who recognized him or suspected they did. Whispers followed the Kingslayer, the exiled lover of his own twin sister. More than once, a drunken Sellsword or braggart tried to goad Jaime into a duel, eager for the fame of besting him. Sometimes Jaime fought them. Sometimes he turned away, burned by the memory of everything he had lost. In private, he cursed Tywin for orchestrating the fiasco, and cursed Robert for raising the sword on Cersei. But darkest of all was the guilt that gnawed at him, because he knew that their incest had been real. None of this had been invented. They had indeed fathered bastards upon the Iron Throne. He had participated willingly, so condemnation was not undeserved. On restless nights, Jaime lurched out of taverns, half wishing for the sweet release of death. But some spark of pride or survival always pulled him away from the brink, leaving him to wander the labyrinth of foreign cities under an assumed name. In King's Landing, Myrcella's absence was felt only by a handful of ladies who had doted on her sweet disposition. The little princess, now recognized as a bastard, lived out her days in a septri near Maidenpool. She had no illusions about returning to court. The septas taught her needlework, reading, and the liturgies of the Seven. She prayed every day for a sign that her mother still watched over her from the beyond. If so, she never sensed one. In that austere setting, she often found herself crying into her pillow at night, missing the older brother who had once teased her mercilessly but was at least familiar, missing Tommen's gentle presence. But no one came to rescue her from that half-life. The realm had cast her aside. Tommen, by contrast, was enjoying a quiet but not unhappy existence in the Stormlands. Lord Penrose, who fostered him at Parchments, found the boy bright and docile. Though Tommen had lost the princely title, the house was compelled by Robert's direct command to raise him well. Over time, Tommen learned to ride a pony across the green hills, read tales of old heroes in the small library, and even practice swordsmanship with a wooden waster. His tutors noticed he was affectionate and well-meaning, if a bit shy. If the realm soared or plummeted outside those castle walls, Tommen remained unaware, content in small joys. Sometimes he asked about his mother, about King Robert, about Joffrey. He was told gently that such questions were better left in the past. The boy accepted it, though a trace of sadness never entirely left his eyes. As for Joffrey, the wall proved a colder, crueler fate than any had imagined. Robert's men had marched him north under guard, handing him over to Jeor Mormont without ceremony. The men of the Night's Watch, battered by years of neglect from the crown, scarcely welcomed a sullen youth who insisted on being addressed as Prince. Joffrey's illusions of grandeur soon ran aground. The Black Brothers ignored his tantrums, made him wash latrines, chop wood, stand freezing atop the windswept ramparts. Taunts from the other recruits stung his pride, and more than once Joffrey tried to lord his name over them, only to be met with laughter. Eventually, after a savage beating from some of the older men in the courtyard, Joffrey understood that no one at the wall gave two figs for the House Lannister or Baratheon or any other. They were the Black Brothers, and if he wanted to survive, he would keep his mouth shut. That transformation did not mellow him so much as it taught him a sullen resentment. Day after day, he seethed, imagining that someday he might break free, return south, and make them all pay. But nights on the wall were long, and life was cheap. Joffrey found himself terrified of the rumors about wildlings and the deeper, stranger rumors about things that stirred beyond the wall. He had no one to rely on, no mother to coddle him. To the men around him, he was just another bastard from the south, no better than 1,000 others who had ended up in black cloaks. Winter would come eventually, and with it, hardships that Joffrey could scarcely imagine. And so the weeks turned to months. In King's Landing, the immediate furor of Cersei's downfall began to fade into an uneasy acceptance of the new status quo. The king had no queen, the Lannisters remained in power but tarnished by scandal, and the lords of the realm maneuvered for advantage. One crisp morning, a messenger arrived from Highgarden, announcing that Mace Tyrell and a retinue would soon approach the capital with his daughter Margaery. The message was couched in flowery language, praising the king's greatness and hinting at a betrothal. Robert flung the parchment aside at first, muttering that the Tyrells were always sending him this or that. But Tywin firmly insisted that Robert at least meet with them. He reminded the king that the Tyrells' breadbasket could feed the capital, and that Margaery's youth and beauty might well spark renewed life in Robert's soul. Robert glowered, but in the end he agreed. On the day the Tyrells arrived, they were greeted with moderate ceremony at the city gates, a sign that King's Landing, at least in name, welcomed our presence. Margaery Tyrell was indeed comely, with soft brown curls and large brown eyes that sparkled with intelligence. She was graceful in her courtesies to the king, not overbold, not too timid. Mace Tyrell, of course, was all puffed grandeur, praising Robert's prowess, his hunts, his storied rebellion. At the welcoming feast that night in the Red Keep, Robert drank considerably, but he also found himself watching Margaery from across the table, noticing how she conversed with the ladies-in-waiting. She was clearly adept at charming a room. When she ventured a small joke about how the rains in the Reach never matched the storms of the Stormlands, Robert let out a short chuckle. That sound was music to Mace's ears. Tywin, seated near Robert, noted the exchange with a faint nod. Renly was there, too, smiling as though he had orchestrated the entire meeting. If all went according to plan, Margaery might become queen, thus giving Renly and his in-laws an enormous foothold in the capital. The next day, Margaery visited the Great September of Baelor, offering pious prayers for the realm's stability, while Mace met with Tywin and Kevin to discuss trade negotiations. Privately, Tywin assessed Margaery's composure and recognized that she was no mere doe-eyed girl. She had been carefully schooled by her grandmother, the famed Olenna Tyrell, in the arts of courtesy and political finesse. Tywin suspected that if she became queen, she would not be a passive figure like some young maidens. Yet the realm might benefit from a queen who was cunning enough to help hold the fractious lords together. It was a far cry from the savage pride and cunning that had characterized Cersei, but Tywin reasoned Margaery might be more flexible, and certainly less prone to dangerous personal entanglements. Robert's reaction was the question. The king had grown reclusive, still stung by the memories of betrayal. Could Margaery truly thaw that bitterness? Or would Robert's appetites lead him to chase whores instead? During a small feast in Margaery's honor that evening, Robert drank more than usual. Emboldened by the wine, he proposed a toast. He raised his cup and hailed the Tyrells as loyal servants of the realm, praising their generosity. Mace, beaming, thanked him lavishly. Robert then made a cryptic remark. The realm needs new life, so perhaps the Tyrell rose can guide this old stag to fatherhood once more. The hall erupted in applause and laughter, for everyone recognized that as a near-betrothal announcement. Margaery lowered her gaze in a show of modesty, while Mace stood, raising his own cup, offering the Tyrells unwavering support. Tywin observed from his seat that Robert had grown red-faced, possibly from drink, but that the king's mood seemed marginally better than it had been in months. That night, the city buzzed with talk that the king would soon declare his betrothal to Margaery Tyrell. Yet the next morning, Robert was in a black temper. He complained to Tywin that the city was full of whisperers, that he wouldn't be forced into a wedding just because the small folk expected it. Tywin privately concluded that the king's pride had been wounded by the knowledge that all of Westeros saw him as a cuckold in his last marriage. He was determined not to appear weak or manipulated again. Tywin used a gentle but insistent approach, reminding Robert that the realm truly did need stability, that an alliance with the Tyrells would dissuade Stannis from hasty moves, that a new queen might produce a legitimate heir. Robert, after a long silence, grudgingly admitted that maybe it was time. The silent subtext was that Robert was lonely. He had bedded whores and let them leave, had drunk so heavily that he sometimes forgot entire nights. But none of it soothed the pain of being betrayed by his own wife. While he had never loved Cersei, the blow to his pride had been colossal. If Marjorie offered a chance at redemption in the eyes of the realm, perhaps that was worth pursuing. He told Tywin to make the arrangements for a formal betrothal. Tywin concealed his satisfaction behind a smooth nod. So it was that in the Hall of 100 Hearths, Robert declared before a gathering of lords, knights, and septons that he intended to wed Marjorie Tyrell. The official wedding would occur in half a year's time, allowing the realm to prepare and the Tyrells to assemble their retinue. The news spread like wildfire throughout King's Landing. Many expressed relief, believing this signaled a fresh start for Robert's monarchy, an end to the gloom cast by the prior scandal. The small folk prayed that Marjorie, known for her grace and charity, would bring them better harvests or at least some benevolence from the throne. In High Garden, the announcement prompted celebrations. Even in the Stormlands, lords recognized that forging a bond with the Tyrells might stabilize the region. Of course, not everyone was pleased. Stannis, upon hearing the news, wrote another scathing letter to the king, decrying the entire arrangement as an attempt to circumvent the rightful line of succession. He pointed out that Robert had no heirs, and if Robert should die, the throne should pass to Stannis, not to some new child. This time, Robert did not bother to reply. Meanwhile, in the Vale, Lisa Arryn and her supporters saw no immediate reason to meddle, though they watched warily for any sign that the capital was turning its gaze on them. In the north, Eddard Stark received a raven announcing the upcoming royal wedding. He responded politely, offering his congratulations, though he declined to journey south for the festivities unless Robert specifically commanded it. Ned was busy with northern affairs, dealing with Ironborn raiders along the coast and ensuring the loyalty of his own vassals. He had no desire to entangle himself further in the intrigues of the capital. All of this outward motion, the betrothal, the feasts, the political maneuvering, did little to mend Robert's deeper woes. He still drank in quantity, still found himself haunted by memories of a family he had believed was his own. Some nights, he would descend into rages, punishing the nearest fool who dared show insolence. On a few occasions, Tywin had to intervene, reminding him not to be seen as a brutal tyrant. Publicly, Robert had always been beloved for his robust humor and warrior spirit. Now, that image frayed at the edges, replaced by a mercurial figure whose fists and temper could flare at the slightest provocation. Tywin's iron discipline kept the city from unraveling. But if the king's behavior worsened, even Tywin might not quell the chaos. And so the stage was set for another conflict that no one had quite anticipated. Renly Baratheon, noticing that the betrothal was largely orchestrated by Tywin, harbored a creeping sense of resentment. Yes, he wanted Marjorie to be queen, but he wanted to be the one controlling that arrangement, not Tywin Lannister. He feared that if Tywin gained too much influence over Robert, the Lannisters would effectively rule in all but name. That might leave Renly locked out of the real power he desired. Renly was no fool. He recognized that Tywin's armies and gold gave him leverage unmatched by any other lord, except perhaps the Tyrells. So Renly quietly forged deeper bonds with Mace Tyrell and, more importantly, with Marjorie's grandmother, the Queen of Thorns, Lady Olenna. Olenna Tyrell was known to be as sharp-tongued as she was shrewd. By building a rapport with her, Renly hoped to ensure that once Marjorie became queen, Tywin would not hold as many strings as he hoped to. Renly's ambition, while not open treason, was to position himself as a crucial power behind the new queen. Littlefinger took note of these undercurrents, gleaning that Renly and the Tyrells might become a major faction within the court. He began maneuvering in small ways to curry favor with them, or at least keep channels open. At the same time, he still paid lip service to Tywin, presenting him with carefully balanced accounts of the crown's finances. Tyrion, in his role as Tywin's eyes and ears, also observed these dances with wry amusement. He recognized that the capital was turning into a swarm of alliances that might, at any moment, crystallize into a confrontation. He also recognized that if a confrontation did occur, Tywin would not hesitate to unleash the Lannister armies upon whomever defied them. Meanwhile, the letters from Stannis grew ever more strident. He insisted that if Robert recognized a child from the upcoming marriage as heir, it would be an illegal overreach. Robert, in a fury, told Tywin that if Stannis dared march against him, he would rally the realm and crush Dragonstone. Tywin counseled caution. He understood that the lords might not rally so quickly behind Robert if they believed Stannis had the clearer claim. After all, the realm had only just witnessed one scandal that proved how precarious the line of succession could be. If Robert died or fell in battle, Tywin did not want Stannis crowned by default. So Tywin quietly began instructing ravens to fly to key lords, urging them to stand with the king against any rebellious Baratheon branch. He offered gold, promises of trade privileges, or advantageous matches. The more uncertain lords, uncertain no longer, found themselves leaning into Tywin's camp. And so the grip of House Lannister upon the monarchy tightened again. Through all of this, the memory of Cersei's final day still lingered in the Red Keep like a rancid perfume. Some claimed that in the darkest corridors, they heard faint echoes of her screams. Others gossiped that her spirit had fled to haunt Tywin specifically, tormenting him at night. Tywin, a man of reason, dismissed such superstition. He slept well enough, or as well as a man can who seldom allowed himself more than a few hours of rest. Still, once in a great while, in that hour between black night and gray dawn, a flash of golden hair caught in his dreams, or the echo of that hateful cry as her severed head was raised to the crowd. Tywin would wake, clench his jaw, and remind himself that she had committed treason of the highest order. He had no place for regret. House Lannister must endure. In the months leading up to the wedding, the capital bustled with preparations. New tapestries were commissioned, streets were scrubbed, and countless barrels of arbor gold arrived at the docks courtesy of the Tyrells. The outer wards of the Red Keep thrummed with excitement. Perhaps, some said, this wedding would restore the city's spirit. The last major royal wedding had been that of Robert to Cersei, overshadowed now by the revelation of her crimes. But perhaps a new queen, especially one as gracious as Margaery Tyrell, would revive the old songs of courtly romance, give King's Landing cause to rejoice. Unspoken but widely understood was the hope that an heir would follow soon after. Even so, tension lay coiled beneath. At times, Robert would fall into black moods, speaking wistfully of the hunts he used to share with Lord Eddard Stark, the battles they fought together, or the memory of Lyanna. The presence of Margaery Tyrell, though welcome in many ways, reminded him that this was a second chance at something he had lost long ago. If any onlooker expected him to fall head over heels for her, they were disappointed. Robert tried his best to be jovial in public, but behind closed doors, he drank and brooded. Margaery approached him delicately, offering gentle conversation about the wonders of the Reach, about the possibility of traveling there to see the famed roses in full bloom. Robert might grunt an answer, or wave her off if he was in a foul temper. Still, Margaery persevered, guided by the cunning wisdom passed down from her grandmother Olenna. She understood that the king was a bruised lion, lashing out to hide his wounds. Step by step, she sought to gain his trust, a process that many found baffling. But Margaery's patience was remarkable. Renly and the Tyrells also had their own agendas for Margaery's future. They hoped that once she was queen, she would have the king's ear often enough to direct policies that favored Highgarden, giving them more sway in the crown's affairs. Tywin recognized that risk. He made certain that his own men, especially Kevan and Tyrion, stayed close to the king, so that even if Robert listened to Margaery, Tywin would still manage the real decisions. At times, Tyrion found himself drawn into tense negotiations with Tyrell cousins, all seeking positions at court. He might banter politely, then slip away for a private conversation with Varys or Littlefinger, gleaning new scraps of intelligence about the Tyrell infiltration. Although Tyrion saw no immediate threat, he considered it unwise to let the Tyrell faction overshadow the Lannisters. In essence, the Red Keep became a place of carefully balanced rivalries, with Robert as the pivot and Tywin presiding over all. Then, just 3 weeks before the wedding, word came that Stannis had gathered a fleet off Dragonstone. Fishermen from the Blackwater Bay reported seeing war galleys sporting the Fiery Heart banner. Panic flickered in the city. Did Stannis mean to attack before the wedding? The gold cloaks manned the walls, the city gates were tightened, and Tywin ordered the Lannister men to muster in the squares. For several tense days, watchers on the city walls scanned the horizon, expecting to see Stannis' ships cross the bay. Robert, furious, threatened to sally forth with the royal fleet and meet him at sea. Tywin convinced him to hold position, mindful that if they left the city unguarded, infiltration or sabotage might occur. The tension grew thick enough to slice with a dagger. But Stannis did not come. His ships remained anchored near Dragonstone, as if an unspoken standoff. Some ravens arrived, bearing the same repeated message. Stannis demanded Robert name him heir or face the consequences. Robert, in a rage, refused to yield. Letters continued to fly back and forth, accomplishing nothing. Over time, the city realized Stannis was staging a show of force rather than launching an immediate invasion. Tywin recognized that if war came, it would likely be after the wedding. The tension might erupt in the following months, and so the capital tried to refocus on the festivities. The wedding day arrived in a blaze of color. The great September of Baelor was draped in golden banners. The bride, Margaery Tyrell, rode through the streets in a litter festooned with fresh roses from the Reach, releasing sweet perfume into the sweaty throngs of onlookers. Robert, in new black and gold raiment, led a procession of knights. Tywin rode near the front, stern and magnificent in polished armor, the Lannister lion upon his breastplate. The small folk cheered, if only out of a desire to celebrate something after so many months of gloom. In the sept, the High Septon officiated the ceremony. Robert stood tall, trying to project the vigor he once displayed in his youth, while Margaery faced him with a composure that belied her nerves. Many watchers noted how, at the moment they joined hands, Robert blinked as if struck by a memory. But he uttered the vows clearly, and Margaery did the same. A hush fell when they sealed the ceremony with the Seven's blessings. The feast afterward was lavish, second only to the fabled tournament that had celebrated Robert's first wedding years before. Tywin had spared no expense, ordering wagon loads of wine, olives, pomegranates from Dorne, even exotic sugar pastries from Essos. Mace Tyrell matched that magnificence with shipments of succulent meats, barrels of honey, and fruits never before seen in King's Landing. Minstrels performed ballads that praised the new queen's loveliness, carefully omitting any reference to Cersei or the scandal. Acrobats tumbled, jugglers juggled, and the entire city turned out in carnival-like revelry. For one night, at least, it seemed like the monarchy might reclaim a measure of splendor. Robert and Margaery sat side by side at the head table. While Robert drank enough to flush his cheeks, he did not descend into outright drunkenness as he often did. Margaery engaged him in gentle banter, laughing at his hunting stories. Off to the side, Renly wore a smile of satisfaction, clearly pleased that his sister-in-law had become queen. Tywin, from his vantage point, watched them carefully. He saw how Margaery would subtly divert Robert's attention away from gloomier thoughts, how she guided him with the lightest of touches. It was remarkable. He also saw how Robert would sometimes pause mid-sentence, as though reminded of a ghost. Then Margaery might place a delicate hand upon his arm, and he would continue. That night, the newlyweds were whisked away to their chambers with the usual rowdy jokes from the crowd. Whether they found harmony in those bedchambers was a question that only they could answer. In the following weeks, the new queen proved a skilled practitioner of public relations. She walked among the small folk, distributing alms, visiting orphanages, chatting about the glories of the Reach. She commanded the scullions in the Red Keep to cook an enormous public meal in the outer yard, letting hundreds of hungry residents sample fine bread and stews. These gestures earned her immediate popularity. Robert observed it all with a mix of amusement and relief. If she was willing to do the heavy lifting of public goodwill, so be it. The tension with Stannis remained. But for a time, the capital breathed easier, lulled by the novelty of a queen who truly seemed to care about their welfare. Meanwhile, Tywin did not relax his vigilance. He scoured every raven for hints that Stannis would move, or that Renly and Mace Tyrell conspired behind the scenes to supplant Robert. He even had Tyrion investigate rumors that a Targaryen princess in the east had hatched dragon eggs. The rumors proved inconclusive, but troubling. If real dragons had been born, the realm might face a threat not seen since Aegon's conquest. Tyrion reported that the Dothraki horde that had once threatened to sail for Westeros had apparently fractured upon their leader Khal Drogo's death. But whispers placed Daenerys Targaryen in uncertain territory, allegedly in possession of 3 living dragons. Tywin mulled the implications. A handful of newly hatched dragons hardly equaled an immediate invasion force. Yet if the Targaryen princess survived and the dragons grew, the next few years could see a crisis that dwarfed even the question of Stannis' claim. Each dawn, the court awoke wondering whether King Robert's mood would be stable or dark. On good days, he might stroll with Marjorie in the gardens, or hold court to hear petitions. On bad days, he would vanish into his private solar with a cask of wine, leaving Tywin to handle any urgent matters. Marjorie occasionally appealed to Tywin for advice on how best to help Robert. Tywin's counsel was blunt. He's a grown man. He will do what he does. We must ensure the realm remains stable regardless. Marjorie did not seem entirely pleased with that response, but she accepted it. She resolved to do what she could to keep Robert from sliding into a perpetual haze. Her influence did not go unnoticed by the lords of the realm. Many believed that Marjorie might become the real power behind the throne if Robert continued in his downward spiral. Some lords murmured that if Robert died and she bore him a son, that child would overshadow Stannis entirely. Yet that scenario hinged on Marjorie conceiving. The weeks and months following the wedding passed without any clear sign of pregnancy. Whispers arose. Perhaps Robert was too deep in drink. Perhaps the ghosts of his old loves weighed on him. Perhaps Marjorie herself lacked fertility. Whatever the cause, the talk churned behind closed doors. Marjorie smiled through it, never betraying any frustration. Renly, for his part, championed the idea that it might take time, that no one should rush a queen. But behind that outward stance, he pressed Marjorie to intensify her efforts. If a child came, the entire political landscape would favor them. Meanwhile, Tywin took no official stance on the matter. He would be content if a legitimate heir appeared, so long as it secured the monarchy. If not, Tywin was prepared to handle alternative plans. Indeed, he still toyed with the idea of encouraging Robert to legitimize Edric Storm as a fallback. For the moment, that notion had receded since Robert was now married, but if a year or more went by without a pregnancy, the question might return. Throughout all these undercurrents, the memory of Cersei's public downfall remained an unspoken cautionary tale. Few at court ever mentioned her name aloud, lest they be accused of dwelling on the king's humiliations. Yet from time to time, someone might recall that the line of the Lannisters had suffered a deep wound in losing both Jaime and Cersei. Tyrion, strolling through the castle with a mocking grin, was the last of Tywin's children. The dwarfish son now served as a reminder that Tywin, so proud of his lion's brood, had ended with a single surviving heir he had always despised. Perhaps that was why Tywin pushed so fiercely to preserve House Lannister's dominance at court. He had sacrificed much to secure it, but the realm's memory is short. As the months passed, the gossip about the incestuous queen gave way to the controversies of the moment. Stannis' threatened rebellion, Marjorie's potential pregnancy, the rumors of dragons across the sea, the minor spats among the lords. Life in King's Landing had a way of marching forward, no matter how grisly the last scandal had been. New feasts took place, new celebrations erupted. The City Watch churned through recruits, hoping to keep order in the disorderly slums. Tywin methodically expanded the crown's coffers through increased taxes, with Littlefinger's grudging help. They were building a war chest to fend off any threat, be it from Dragonstone or beyond. Several months after the royal wedding, an unexpected raven arrived from Riverrun, announcing that Hoster Tully had died, and Edmure Tully now ruled as Lord of Riverrun. Edmure had never been particularly fond of the Lannisters, but Tywin sent a formal letter of condolence and congratulation, hinting at future cooperation. The Riverlands were pivotal in any war. Meanwhile, from the north came quieter tidings of Ned Stark dealing with an outbreak of Greyjoy raids on the Stony Shore. Tywin read the letter from Stark without emotion, noting only that the North was preoccupied with its own troubles. He set it aside, focusing on the possibility that Stannis might soon land troops near the capital. Kevan Lannister oversaw the city's fortifications, drilling the men daily, ensuring that if Stannis or any other force approached by sea, they would find a formidable defense. Tyrion occasionally accompanied Kevan to inspect the ramparts, making witty remarks about how the city's parapets might be improved. Kevan, ever the dutiful soldier, tolerated Tyrion's jests, mindful that Tywin wanted Tyrion involved. Despite the city's vigilance, no attack came that year. Stannis sat at Dragonstone with his fleet, locked in a stalemate of wills. Spies reported that he was trying to court certain lords to his cause, claiming he was the rightful heir. But Tywin's gold and Robert's position as sitting king kept many from defecting. Only a few minor houses signaled sympathy for Stannis. Still, a few was enough to cause trepidation. If a war erupted, Stannis might sweep around the Crownlands with an alliance of scattered lords, hoping to topple Robert in one swift campaign. In response, Tywin quietly brokered pacts with the Rosbys, the Stokeworths, and other Crownland families to ensure their loyalty. Gold has a language all its own, and Tywin spoke it fluently. In time, the tension coalesced into a common refrain among the lords at court. "We must hope the king fathers an heir soon, for all our sakes." If that happened, they reasoned Stannis' claim would be overshadowed. If Robert remained childless, a civil war might loom whenever Robert's health failed. The entire realm pinned its hopes on Queen Margaery's womb. She remained serene, never letting the whispers see her unsettled. At feasts, she would dance with Robert, drawing applause from the watchers. Robert might grin and indulge in the moment, but once the feast ended, he would retreat to brood. Margaery tried to coax him to speak of his sorrows, but the king was guarded. She gleaned only fragments about Lyanna, about Ned Stark, about the emptiness he felt upon the Iron Throne. On some nights, she concluded that Robert's true love had died years ago in that bed of blue roses in the north, and no living woman could fill that void. Yet at least the monarchy was not dissolving into open conflict, which Tywin considered a success of its own. The year rolled onward. The harvest came. The wedding feasts were just a memory. The city remained restive, but stable. The daily tasks of administration and life overshadowed the horrors of the past. Some might even have believed that the realm would continue this uneasy peace indefinitely, that the intrigues swirling around them would remain only intrigues, never boiling over. Others, more perceptive, knew better. They recognized that the seeds of war had been sown the moment Robert executed Cersei for her incest, exposing the fragile nature of Baratheon rule. The question was merely when those seeds would sprout. In one corner of the Red Keep, a small garden seldom visited by courtiers, Margaery sometimes walked with her handmaid, reflecting on the changes in her life. There, amid rosebushes transplanted from Highgarden, she confided her hopes that she might give the king a child, unify the realm, and bring the crown to a gentler, more prosperous era. Her handmaid, a quiet girl from the Reach, would nod encouragingly. Margaery wanted to believe that enough kindness and intelligence could heal the kingdom. But this was King's Landing, where daggers lurked beneath every smile, and where the memory of the last queen's execution was never far from anyone's mind. On one particular evening, Margaery found herself in that garden with Renly. He teased her about whether she had encountered any success yet, meaning pregnancy. She responded with a wry smile, saying it was not for lack of trying. Renly murmured that if the king proved incapable, there might be other ways. Margaery gave him a reproachful glance, and he fell silent. They both understood the line that had to be towed. Royal heirs needed to be unequivocally recognized as Roberts. Yet the conversation hinted at the lengths the Tyrells might consider if it came to that. Such was the underbelly of politics in Westeros. Margaery, outwardly pious and sweet, was no less pragmatic than the rest of her family. Far from these hush-hush conversations, Tywin carried on, methodically building alliances, stamping out threats, ensuring that every major piece on the board was pointed away from war. The The day might come, though, that war would come anyway. Perhaps it would arrive by sail, with Stannis' fleet surging into Blackwater Bay. Perhaps it would arrive from the east, with Targaryen dragons lighting the sky. Or perhaps it would arrive from within, if Robert's mood snapped and the fragile alliances collapsed. Tywin kept his ledger balanced against all these possibilities, for that was his nature. Never trust that fortune will remain gentle, always prepare for the worst. Tyrion, wandering the taverns of Flea Bottom in disguise, sometimes wondered if his father was truly content with the outcome of this crisis. Yes, House Lannister had avoided a total meltdown. Yes, Cersei and Jaime had been purged, along with their monstrous secret. But had Tywin gained a net advantage, or merely prevented an irreversible collapse? Tyrion suspected that the old lion's victory was hollow, that each day he realized House Lannister's hold on the throne might be ephemeral. Yet Tywin would never admit such a doubt aloud. He would fight to the last to uphold the family's reputation, just as he had done when he spilled Rain blood. But the realm had changed, shaped by scandal and deception. The Lannister name might remain powerful, but it was no longer invulnerable. Tyrion found it both ironic and fitting. Tywin had always claimed to be forging an unassailable legacy, yet that legacy had cost him 2 of his 3 children, left him reliant on the one child he loathed, and forced him into an uneasy alliance with a drunken king who might at any moment lash out. Not a day passed that Cersei's ghost did not linger in the Red Keep. In the minds of the people, her sin and final punishment had become a cautionary tale about hubris. Servants whispered that no matter how high you climb, if you defy the natural order, if you bed your own twin brother, attempt to seat bastards on the throne, the gods themselves will see you brought low. On feast days, drunken knights sometimes told bawdy jokes about the twin lovers, though not so loud that Tywin might overhear and have them flogged. The city's memory had distilled Cersei's tragedy into a scandalous anecdote. But for those who had known her personally, the story was more complicated. Jaime, in exile, wrestled daily with guilt. Tyrion sometimes found himself recalling kinder moments from their shared childhood. The flicker of sibling camaraderie before life parted them into bitter roles. And Tywin, though he never betrayed any sign of regret, walked the halls with a stiffer gait, as though weighed down by an invisible burden. As the next year dawned, the final vestiges of the scandal gave way to the new questions that plagued the realm. Margaery Tyrell remained childless as winter approached. Stannis refused to back down. Targaryen rumors intensified, claiming Daenerys Stormborn now led a small khalasar across the Red Waste. Ned Stark's letters from the north mentioned ominous signs beyond the wall. The realm faced a confluence of threats that no single man could easily quell, not even Tywin Lannister at the height of his cunning. And in the midst of it, King Robert reeled, battered by nightmares of the past and an uncertain future. Perhaps, if the gods were merciful, Margaery would soon conceive a child, giving the realm a focus for its loyalty and quelling Stannis' claims. Perhaps the Targaryen girl would perish in the east. Perhaps winter's cold would keep the wildlings at bay. But Westeros was not a land where mercy ruled. It was a realm of struggles, each house striving for advantage, each rumor a seed of turmoil waiting to sprout. One chilly morning, Tywin rose before dawn, dressed in a plain tunic, and walked to the window of his solar, gazing out upon the Blackwater. He recalled the day he had confronted Cersei, how the seeds of her destruction had begun with that single conversation. He remembered how he had methodically laid the path that led to her trial and execution. Logic told him he had done what was necessary. Emotion, that flicker which he had always taught himself to ignore, stirred in him. He closed his eyes, exhaled, and opened them again, focusing on the city below. The city that House Lannister had saved from a monstrous scandal, the city that might one day cry out for new leadership or a new war, the city that would never repay him for the cost. House Lannister survived, and for Tywin that was enough. Emotion be damned. Such was the shape of the realm in the aftermath of Cersei's exposure. The false heirs were scattered, the legitimate monarchy left battered but alive, and Tywin's iron will still reigned over the royal councils. A sense of uneasy calm lay across King's Landing, a hush before an unknown storm. And if that storm eventually broke, whether in the form of Stannis' war galleys, a Targaryen horde, or Robert's own self-destruction, Tywin stood ready, just as he had always been, to do what must be done. The scars from the Bastardy scandal reminded everyone that the illusions of power could shatter in an instant. But illusions or not, power was all that truly mattered to a man like Tywin. And so he steeled himself each morning, resolute, prepared for the next crisis that would inevitably descend upon the Seven Kingdoms, confident only that House Lannister would emerge, if not unscathed, at least undefeated. For as long as Tywin Lannister drew breath, the realm would learn anew that no offense went unanswered, no weakness went unexploited, and no secret could truly remain hidden forever.